So, when it came to his time as the leader of the Muslims, the Amir al-Mu'mineen, we saw a very large expansion of lands, right? And it was his, for example, people like Khalid bin Walid, Abu Bakr bin Jarrah, the commanders that he sent, Muthanna bin Harith, for example, right? He was able, through his leadership, they were able to take, they were able to conquer the Persian Empire, which is like, if you think about how USA is a superpower today, Persians were the superpower of that time. I think we really underestimate that, right? When, the Battle of Qadisiyah took place, and the numerous battles that took place under Umar anhu's time, it's really underestimated the fact that the Arabs were not even considered as, people that we even need to focus on, right? The Persians and Romans consistently ignored them because they were just desert people, right? But subhanAllah, look what Islam done for these people. Look what Islam has done for us, right? They turned, from, lowly people to the greatest people this ummah has ever seen.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of the Tarikhology Podcast with your host Mohammed Aminoor Rahman. I'm joined today by one of our renowned historians and a good friend of mine, Niyaz Ahmed. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
How are you doing, my brother?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. I'm doing well, alhamdulillah.
So Niyaz needs no introduction, but for those that don't know who he is, he's currently a history teacher and he's got a degree in history with politics. Is that correct?
I teach politics.
So he teaches politics. He's got an undergraduate degree in history and he's also completed a postgrad in secondary history. Is that correct?
History, yeah.
At the University of Coventry, and he's now acting as a history teacher. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for coming back on.
Oh, wa alaikum assalam. I'm happy to be back.
How have you been?
Alhamdulillah, I've been good. It's been a very a lot of developments over the last month since the last time we've met.
It has been a while.
It has been a very long time.
The setup is slowly improving. How's your studies been? How are your classes coming along?
Again, can't complain. Alhamdulillah, it's a development process. The more we do, the more we learn. Every single day we have that mentality. We learn something new.
MashaAllah, that's really good. Today's podcast is primarily regarding leadership.
Yeah.
So the aim of today's podcast is to understand what makes a successful leader. Who is a successful leader? What characteristics do they have? And some examples. Now, obviously, as Muslims, we believe that the best leader was the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And obviously, after him, we have his followers. So we've got the Khulafa Rashidun. For the audience, could you please explain who are the Khulafa? What is the Khilafah?
Well, the Khilafah is an establishment in which governs and institutes and implements the political system of Islam, in which the rulings of the Sharia, the rulings of our Prophet ﷺ, and what is mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah is implemented from a political standpoint, an economic standpoint, and a social standpoint. He is meant to be the protector of the Muslims and governor of the Muslim Ummah.
Yeah.
And of course, after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, immediately the task was put upon the Sahaba to find a successor. The word Khalifa comes from to succeed. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, his title became the Khalifa to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, where he was known to be the successor of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Now the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam was the greatest of mankind, and yet he spoke wonders about Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, his best friend, one of the first people to accept Islam. And of course, one of the best fits to become the leader of the Ummah once he passed away. And again, the signs were there. When in his last couple of weeks, where Prophet ﷺ was not able to lead the prayers, he tasked Abu Bakr to lead the prayers. So when they were having that conversation, there was no other leader but Abu Bakr to take over. And essentially, when Abu Bakr took over, he gave a speech. And one of his most opening speeches that he gave, is startling, and I think it really summarizes exactly what a leader should be like, right? And particularly one that is the leader of the Muslim Ummah, the one is the protector of the Muslims, the Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Amir of the believers, as Umar and became to know. And in this speech, I'm paraphrasing here,
of course.
But he mentioned and it's mentioned in Bidayah wa Nihaya by Ibn Kathir, the speech where he talks about the fact that I am only strong if I am protecting the weak. If I am only strong if I am being just. And the same way that people should come to me and speak to me and myself about my faults.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't be the one that if at any point where I feel that I am not protecting the oppressed, then I am the weak person, not you guys, right? So the speech of Abu Bakr really does summarize, and inshallah, hopefully we can discuss it and put it up, where he describes the role of a just and noble leader. And if you look at the life of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he was only Khalifa for about 2.5 years, and subhanallah, he was able to save Islam from potentially complete disunity from the very beginning. When he came to the Ridda Wars, when we had a group of people, the Bedouin tribes, saying that we're no longer going to pay the zakah. So he immediately made it a very clear aim that we need to dispel of those people and unite the ummah as one. And I think he was able to really establish that from the very beginning, and forever to this day he will be one of those examples in which we look to for leadership.
That's a very well put. Regarding Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, his leadership style, how would you say his leadership style was? What made him who he was?
So when we look at Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was known to be a very soft-spoken person. He was known to be a person that was of a calm nature, a very, very polite nature, right? But obviously, when it came to sake of Islam, he would be the first and foremost to come to its aid. Yeah. So when he becomes a leader, when he becomes a Khalifa, right? His personality changes. He becomes this really, really, strong and authoritative person. Even with Umar ibn al-Khattab, he was known to be an extremely, extremely strong man, physical specimen. Yeah. Inshallah. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu would even have disputes or sometimes disagreements with Umar al-Khattab. At one point, he grabbed his beard, and where even Umar al-Khattab would, stand, okay, yeah, this is Abu Bakr's show right now, right? Even when there were some disagreements that took place, right? Abu Bakr, he understood the tenets of leadership, but most importantly, not really about leadership. He understood that the main goal is to protect Islam and protect the Muslims, protect the Ummah, right? And that is what he's prioritized. And again, everything that he did was to ensure the safety of the Muslims and the safety of this Ummah and the preservation of Islam and its message.
So you spoke about Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, one of the first of the Khulafa. You mentioned that the characteristics that he had made him who he was. How did his followers respond to his leadership style?
Well, of course, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was, he was well respected amongst the Sahaba. He was known as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's right-hand man. He was known to be the person to go to if the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't there, right? He was the man, who the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam describes as Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, right? The trustworthy, right? So again, his exemplary character in and of itself, we can spend a whole, forget one podcast, probably a whole entire series, right? Exactly. So much work has been given on Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and he's an inspiration for our ummah. But if you want to whittle it down to some characteristics, one, it was his humbleness. He understood his duty. He understood his duty and his idea of responsibility, right? Again, many stories that are narrated, but one particular story that comes to mind is when Umar al-Khattab would see, again, I'm paraphrasing the story. Umar al-Khattab would see that a blind, this very old blind woman in Medina, right? Every single day she would see food being dropped off to her. Right, food and resources and supplies dropped off to her. Umar Khattab would be what's going on here, right? Where is she getting this food from? Where is she getting these supplies from? She went to the woman and asked her, and she's like, oh, I'm a blind woman. I don't know. There's this very old man that comes to me and gives me food and gives me resources. And then when Umar Khattab found out later on, it was the Khalif. It was Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu himself
that would hand it over.
That would hand it over to his people. So it's about understanding that when you are a leader, it's not about how do I improve myself only, but how do I improve and what is my duty towards my people. That is what I should prioritize over myself. Because in positions of leadership, it's difficult. Politics is a very difficult thing to do. There are certain decisions that you need to make that could potentially, be a very difficult decision. Where you might have to potentially, do things that might not necessarily be, exactly what you want to do. But Abu Bakr, the Khulafa al-Rashidun, understood that their guidelines are built upon Islam, the Quran and the Sunnah, and they never strayed away from that. And again, that's what united the Muslim Ummah, and that's what, you know, it was the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and, you know, monumental people like Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, Umar al-Khattab, Uthman radiallahu anh, Ali radiallahu anh, right? These are the people who should be our role models, not people like Superman, Spider-Man, fictional characters, right?
Yeah.
That often, unfortunately, we see today.
Yeah.
They were titans of men that we're not even worth, you know, standing in the dust of their footsteps. But we can only learn from them. We can only learn from them.
On a completely side point, before we were discussing leadership, and you mentioned how one thing that made the Mongolian Empire so successful was the what was it? You said that they excelled on two fronts. What
Discipline. Discipline. I always say this, that you can never ever be a good leader if you don't know how to be a follower. Right, you can't be a good leader unless you know how to be a good follower. And when it came to like, you know, not only the Mongolians, right, the Mongol Empire, the, you know, Genghis Khan and his followers and the Mongol tribes, but we're also talking about any army, right, any sort of leadership that instills discipline in his soldiers, discipline in his people, right, and most importantly, a zeal for the cause that they're going for is one that will always be successful. In the words of Umar ibn Khattab, Khalid bin Walid, right, you know, famous military general, Islamic military general, when he was fighting against a 200,000, according to like the biggest estimate, a 200,000 men Persian army, right, at the Battle of the Chains.
Oh yes,
right,
yes, okay.
Right. Again, very famous quoted, like, you are fighting a people that value the afterlife more than you guys value your own life, right? They value death more than they value
life,
the pleasures and luxuries that you guys seek out for life, right? So this is what made the Muslim Empire so successful, right? Muslim state so successful is because it was full of people that were committed to one cause and one cause only: the betterment of Islam and its deen and its service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when it comes to the Mongols in particular, they had very, very strong discipline, and they were united amongst, you know, one leader who was Genghis Khan, and they had certain religious values, certain political values that they all stuck with. He was able to unite the tribes, which the Mongolians at that point in time had not been united for a very long time, and Genghis Khan was able to instill that discipline, and that is what made them successful in the aspect that they were able to conquer so much land. And on the second front is that he trained them up to be exceptional warriors, right? The people of those lands, you know, which is often referred to as Transoxiana today, like, you know, places like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, the Turkish steppe and stuff like that. They, you know, very, very strong warriors, very, very strong warriors. You know, even if you see today, you know, if you go to those sort of places, you see people in like horseback, archery, all those sorts of things. SubhanAllah, you know, beautiful people, beautiful civilization.
You mentioned how they'd have on horses, they do archery.
Archery.
When we tried it, on foot.
I can't even do archery. just no one.
Now imagine going,
just standing up.
And obviously we don't have the pressure. Like back then it was a battle. They'd go. Now they have that. There was a pressure. You had the expectation. You can't miss. Now that's pretty impressive. How would you say, or who would you say are probably the most successful leaders? Or let's not say the most successful. Who would you say are very influential leaders in Islamic history? In Islamic history,
of course, we have the Anbiya. We have the Anbiya. Some, you know, the 25 Anbiya, you know, the 25 prophets that I mentioned in the Quran. You know, are only some of the thousands of prophets that Allah has sent down to mankind. And of course, you know, one particular characteristic that all the prophets had, right, was that they were all shepherds.
Yes.
All shepherds. The Prophet ﷺ mentions this in the hadith, that even he himself was at a young age a shepherd. Now, what is it about shepherds? Why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught our prophets to be shepherds before anything else, before they were given positions of power? It's because it's the characteristic of shepherds that really nurture us to become leaders, right? I'll give you some characteristics that, you know, that shepherds have that were translated into the tasks that the prophets had to do. One of them, for example, is responsibility. Very, very simple one, responsibility. On two fronts. One, because normally when you're a shepherd, you're hired by someone that's higher above you, right? You're hired to look after the sheep. Right? So there's one that you have to uphold the responsibility, the amana that's been given to you. Right? And the second, of course, is looking after the sheep. Am I capable of looking after at least a group of animals which can be ordered, can be disciplined if you treat them properly? But if you treat them with discontent, right, what are they going to do? They're going to run away from you. They're going to, maybe, you know, try and run away or sort of, you know, mess about, right?
Yeah.
As do human beings work, right? Some other characteristics, for example, the first to spot danger, right? The first to spot danger is your duty. You can't just go to the owner and say, look, a wolf came and ate one of my sheep. I never spotted it.
Yeah.
You can't just go up and say that, can you?
No.
But you have to be one of the first to spot danger. As a shepherd, you must have that sort of characteristics. It's the same with leaders. You need to understand what is good for your people and the first to spot any incoming dangers. For whatever happens to your people, you are responsible for them, right? Even if you didn't expect it, even if you didn't know about it, right? You need to have known about it. You're responsible, right? It's the same with our Prophet ﷺ, right? When, you know, obviously they were in Medina, right?
Yeah.
And so at one point there was a call, you know, a lot of people, in the middle of the night there was a call that saying that, oh, the Quraysh are here, right? There were alarms that were set off all across Medina, right? And the Sahaba went to the outskirts of Medina to see what was happening. And guess who they found there? The Prophet ﷺ himself within his armor, right? And he's like, okay, alhamdulillah, I've checked. Let's go back. So this is the sort of leaders we need to be, right? And some other characteristics, of course, there's loads, but others are including, you know, the idea of organization, for example. You need to be able to keep all that random sheep in one place. So again, these are just some characteristics, obviously, that, you know, the scholars talk about, in which, why is it so important that they were shepherds, right? So that's really, really important. But it's the idea of nurturing the leaders. Now, when we talk about Islamic history after the Prophet ﷺ, we have, subhanAllah, so many. We have leaders of our shuyukh, right? You know, the four imams, for example, they were leaders of their schools of thoughts, right? They were the people you would go to for anything fiqh related, hadith related, for example, right? When we talk about politically, obviously we've got to talk about people like Musa bin Nusayr, right? Umar bin Abdul Aziz, right? Obviously the four Khulafa Rashidun, obviously without question, without a shadow of a doubt. And of course, like if you go much later, we're talking about figures like Salahudin, Nuruddin, Muhammad Al-Fatih. And again, all of them had one characteristic, which I believe I really do want to mention. Right? Is that one characteristic? I've studied a lot of like different figures in history, right? And I've seen one common characteristic that I see in every single one of them. And it's their parenting. It's their parents. Right, it's the upbringing that they've received. Right, let's talk about Salahudin, for example. Salahudin, he didn't come out of nowhere. He didn't come out of a vacuum. Right, his father was a governor of Tikrit in I believe it's in southern Iraq. Right, and his mother was obviously someone that was very religious. Right, and because of his father's connections with Imaduddin Zengi and his uncle Shirkuh, who was one of the best military commanders of his time, he not only had that spiritual guidance from his father, that political guidance from his father, the idea of how politics works, but he also got the military strategic insight from his uncle Shirkuh, and then he got his spiritual leanings from, you know, from his tutors, from the shuyukh, and from Nuruddin Zengi himself as well. Right, it's because of that surrounding that he was a part of,
the environment that he was put into,
that he was built up in. He was built from a very young age. You know, he was given positions like the chief of Damascus, the chief of the police force in Damascus, right? Imagine at the age of 18, right? Would you trust an 18-year-old today, right? to be in charge of a small group of people, let's say, right? But he was put in charge as the chief of police of Damascus, and he done an immense job. There were poems written about him. Poems written about this, alhamdulillah, still you can see today. You can still that have survived today.
For our listeners, anyone that doesn't know who Salahudin is, can you just mention one thing that is famous?
So of course, Salahudin is most famously known as the liberator of Jerusalem during the time of the Crusades, which hopefully we'll discuss in a little bit more detail. But yeah, he was famous for liberating Jerusalem from the Crusaders. And of course, he was known even by Western historians to be an exceptional leader in the aspect of his, you know, of his mannerism, his characterisms, and the fact that he was known even by Western historians to be a generous and well-known political leader, very, very smart and intelligent. Even by Western historians, he's claimed to be so.
Nice. We've spoken a bit about Salahudin. Name me another leader, someone influential.
I mean, my specialism is, of course, Muhammad Al-Fatih, the Ottomans, right? I can talk about numerous Ottoman sultans. Muhammad Al-Fatih, Sultan Abdul Hamid II, again, an exceptional leader in his very exceptional circumstances of his time in the late 1800s during the decline of the Ottoman Empire.
Let's start with Muhammad Al-Fatih. Tell me a bit about him for the listeners.
So Muhammad Al-Fatih again is most famous for being known as the liberator, the opener of Constantinople, which is modern day Istanbul, and again establishes the Ottoman state as a world power. at that time. Now, his upbringing is very, very interesting. Now, there are three things which I believe, in order to create leaders, you need to have three main things. Right? One we've established is upbringing, as we've mentioned. Another one is also community. It's not only your family that are there to nurture you. It's also the community around you, right? What is it that allowed people like Salahudin and Muhammad Al-Fatih, again, not only their family, not only their upbringing, like Muhammad Al-Fatih had a very similar upbringing to Salahudin. Again, his father was the Sultan, right? And he had like the best tutors available to him, right? But he also had a community of people around him. The Muslims of the time, were of people of substance, right? The people of substance, and the third part is institutions, right? He needed to have systems in place in order to allow him to rise through the platforms of power, right? And those platforms of power is what he went through when he was a young age, right? He had, he was able to speak six languages from a very young age, right? He had memorized the Quran, right? He memorized hadith. He was a student of fiqh, tafsir, hadith, right?
Do you know what languages specifically?
Yeah, so you obviously you had Ottoman Turkish, Latin, Greek, and a couple of other languages that have escaped my mind right now. But again, Latin, Greek, again, he knew the language of the Greek Orthodox Church. He knew the language of the Byzantines that he intended to conquer, right? And he was taught this from a very, very young age, and he was built for power, right? He was built for power. He was given governorship of certain pieces of land whilst his father was the Sultan. And at one point, at the age of 12 years old, Sultan Murad II, his father, decided to resign.
Yeah,
now, the reasonings are slightly different, but the most common opinion is that he wanted to leave politics. He wanted to leave a life of piousness and asceticism. So at the age of 12, Muhammad Al-Fatih is given the position as the leader, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman state. And it's in this stage where he learns a lot. At this point, stage, he's still a bit arrogant. He's still quite, he's a young kid, right? Obviously, there's that pride that's still in him.
I mean, he's only 12, right?
He's only 12. And this experience humbles him, right? Because in these 2 years, the leaders of all of Europe, they realize, okay, this is our chance now. There's a 12-year-old on the throne, right? So maybe we can actually try and battle the Ottomans and see if we can get some of the land back they took from us. So obviously, his advisors are slightly bit worried. And then, of course, there are some other reasons, such as the Janissary revolt that takes place in Muhammad Al-Fatih's time, and they're able to convince his father to come back and take over. And in 1444, when he does take over, he's able to defeat essentially what is essentially then, you can argue the 10th Crusade, although some historians don't class it as a crusade, in which they were able to defeat, I believe it was the Battle of Varna.
Yes, 1444, against the Hungarians.
And the Hungarians, I believe it was, So he was built for leadership from a very, very young age. And it's those ideals that were instilled in him from a very young age, it's that nurturing. It was that creation of a leader. Because of both, he had his family, he had his father. He had community around him, right? Not only the higher palace officials that were surrounding him, but the people that he would interact with when he was the leader of and governors of some places in the Ottoman domains. And then most importantly, the institution in of itself, the Ottoman system in of itself, right? The system of political governance. How you had the shuyukh, for example, that held the Sultan accountable, and then the Sultan held the people to account, and the people held the Sultan to account. Right? Because you had those systems in place that allowed him not to become too greedy with power. Right? But became a leader where he could actually understood that it's not only myself. I'm not trying to be the only one powerful here. I am expanding Islamic lands because this is what is obligated for me to do. Right? I need to spread Islam across the world. And this is what he believed, and this is what he did.
Wow. That's very interesting. Muhammad Al-Fatih, he first took the throne, as you mentioned, when he was 12, and then 2 years later it was taken off him. The Battle of Varna took place, and then Sultan Murad eventually passes away. If I'm correct, he becomes the Sultan again when he was 19.
About 19.
About 19. How well do you know your dissertation as far as was on the fall of Constantinople? Or the conquering of Constantinople. What would you say were some of the key, just for those that are curious, the key incidents that took place for the fall of Constantinople? We could talk about this in a lot more detail later, but
of course, very, very summarized very, very quickly.
Of course.
As soon as he comes into power, he makes it his goal that, okay, I'm going to conquer Constantinople, right? Now, there's a lot of reasons to this. I mean, like about 11 to about 15 times, I can't remember the exact figure, that the Muslims have actually tried to take over ever since, the time of Muawiyah radiallahu anhu. Now, at this point in time, the Byzantine Empire was just Constantinople now. The rest of the empire had pretty much fallen, and Constantinople was for the taking. But they had very large walls. Physically, it was very difficult to actually enter. The Theodosian walls. That's it. Yeah. So obviously, he needed a plan to try and get through them. Right. So the story goes where there was a man called Urban, a Hungarian engineer, and he initially offered his services to the Byzantines. To the Romans, right? He's like, look, I've got this massive weapon. I've got this really, really big cannon that can break down any wall you can ever think of, right? Initially, the Byzantines are quite interested, but they can't afford his fees. So Urban, what does he decide to do? I want to go to the next person that might want it. He goes to Muhammad Al-Fatih. Muhammad Al-Fatih is like, I'll give you whatever money you want. Make me this weapon. So he makes this weapon, he builds this weapon, even though it's in this very prototype stages sort of thing, right? By 1453, by about May 1453 in the Gregorian calendar, Muhammad al-Fatih sends about 100,000, according to the highest estimates, about 100,000 soldiers towards Constantinople with about 400 ships to take over the city, using these cannons, using that big cannon that Urban made. However, his cannon is a bit limited in the way that it takes 3 hours to reload. It takes about 3 hours. It's a very, very big cannon, right? It takes about 3 hours to reload. But once it's hit, it does break down the walls. But because it takes so long to reload, as soon as you hit a part of the wall, what did the defenders end up doing? They end up trying to
rebuild the wall.
End up rebuilding the wall. So for about 53 days, the siege goes on. There's a number of stories. There's a beautiful story where in order to get through the Golden Horn, which is a stretch of sea, and the big chain that was blocking the ships from going onto the harbour, what Muhammad al-Fatih did was he dragged his ships across what is the land, the island of Galata, across the land onto the other side of the chain, right? And it was a military feat that no one had ever seen before, right? It was monumental.
Yeah, if you think about the manpower, like he took ships over ground, over land, up and then down.
But see, this is an aspect of leadership. How is it that he came up with this idea, right? Even if he didn't come up with himself, right? He's willing to listen to advisors. What's really, really important to understand about leadership is that you have to remain humble at times as well. You have to know that sometimes I might not have all the answers, but I do at least surround myself with people that will have the answers, and I need to be willing to listen to them. That's not even a leader of a country. That's the leader of any organization. Even if you're the leader of two people, right? Something as small as that. You listen to the people that are around you because they might have insights that are different to yours, that might provide a solution to it.
They might have an alternative perspective that might work.
Exactly. So again, that's a very key characteristic of a leader. If you think it's my way or the highway all the time, then you're going to be limited in what you can do. You're very limited in what you can do. But again, circumstances require different attitudes when it comes to leadership. But when it comes to the examples of Muhammad al-Fatih, we know what characteristics they had, and most importantly, when it comes to our Muslim leaders, why is it that we remember people like Muhammad al-Fatih, Salahudin, right? At the time of Salahudin, for example, there were 3 caliphs. In the Fatimid Empire, in the Abbasid Empire, and then you had the Muslim Spain as well, right? Do we remember their names today? Do you remember their names?
No,
we don't. We remember Salahudin though, right? Because Salahudin understood the importance of how spreading Islam and how we use our morals, our piety in order to spread Islam, not just through conquest, but just by understanding that, look, that it is Allah that helps us. It's not us. It's Allah that helps us, and that's who makes us successful leaders and successful people and successful followers. Definitely.
Nice. So, just to summarize, just the end of the story. So, as the ships came down, what happens after that?
So as the ships are able to come down, that makes life a lot easier for Muhammad al-Fatih. So again, he's able to send his cannons, and around the end of May, 1453, he's able to obviously enter Constantinople, and obviously starts immediately. What he does is obviously he takes the Hagia Sophia. Now the Hagia Sophia, often there's a lot of misconceptions with the Hagia Sophia when it comes to why has he turned the church into a mosque, sorry. But the aspect we've got to remember, the Hagia Sophia was not only a church, it was the government building. In the same way the Houses of Parliament is the government building of the UK, the White House is for the US. the Hagia Sophia was the government building, the government base for the Byzantines. So it's only right that,
So it wasn't more theological, it was more political.
Yeah, it was definitely a political move, right? Because this is the government building. You take the Houses of Parliament, you've got control over England, haven't you? Right? You got control over the UK. You take over the White House. I mean, there's so many movies that about taking over the White House nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you take over the sea of power.
Yeah,
and you've got it. So his move was more. You could say it was more of a political move.
Yeah,
to take over the Hagia Sophia.
Yeah.
And that one thing which I was curious about, because I never really knew this. What happened to the emperor? Because we know he fought for the last stand.
Yeah.
But is there anything written about him? Like,
as in, there was a prophecy. There was a prophecy in Byzantine folklore, right? That the first leader of the Byzantine Empire, or the Roman Empire as in at the time, obviously the word Byzantine came much later on, that the empire would be created by a man called Constantine and end by a man named Constantine. And Constantine 11th was the bill. And, give credit where credit's due. He defended his land to the absolute last point. Like, he wasn't willing to run away, even though he had chances to do so. So, give credit where it's due. He did try and defend his land. But to this day, we don't know what actually happened to him, whether he died in battle. Like, his body was never found. His body was never found. So whether he was burnt or, killed in battle, we don't really know what happened to him. But based on the evidence, maybe, we can assume that he died in battle. Yeah.
Okay.
He died in the siege.
He died in the siege. And straight away, did Muhammad al-Fatih move his capital there, or was there?
So immediately he set upon making Istanbul or Constantinople the capital of the Ottoman domains, and immediately went into the process of like Islamifying Istanbul, right? Allowing Christians, Jews to still remain in peace, right? To allow them to stay in their compounds, right? But now we're creating like Islamic institutions within like the madrasas, like the mosques, the masjids.
So essentially just a new form of government.
Yeah.
But that's about it. Yeah. Like the previous communities could stay where they were.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's really, really interesting. We've spoken about Salahudin and Muhammad al-Fatih. One person we haven't spoke about much was Umar radiallahu anhu.
Yeah, of course.
As one of in my opinion, one of my personal favorites in terms of like Islamic history, in terms of military expansion. Of course, yeah. You speak a bit about him.
Umar al-Khattab, subhanAllah, he, again, if you go back to remember about his conversion story, right? The fact that, the Muslims became empowered after he became Muslim, right? Because they knew having a man like Umar al-Khattab, remember, he was also the one mentioned in the dua of the Prophet ﷺ, like, Ya Allah, allow one of the two Umars to accept Islam. The other Umar being Abu Jahl. So, he's a monumental figure, subhanAllah, radiallahu anh, one of the best, to a point where Prophet ﷺ said that, if there would be any prophet after me, there would no prophets, but if there was to be one, it would be Umar. So, when it came to his time as the leader of the Muslims, Amir al-Mu'mineen, we saw a very large expansion of lands, right? And it was his, for example, people like Khalid bin Walid, Abu Bakr bin Jarrah, the commanders that he sent, Muthanna ibn Harith, for example, right? He was able, through his leadership, they were able to conquer the Persian Empire, which is like, if you think about how USA is a superpower today, Persians were the superpower of that time. I think we really underestimate that. Right, when the Battle of Qadisiyah took place and the numerous battles that took place under Umar anhu's time, it's really underestimated the fact that the Arabs were not even considered as people that we even need to focus on. Right, the Persians and Romans consistently ignored them because like they were just desert people. Right, but subhanAllah, look what Islam done for these people. Look what Islam has done for us. Right, they turned from lowly people to the greatest people this ummah has ever seen.
You see, that's very interesting how no one, the Byzantines or the Sasanian Persians, no one bothered to conquer Arabia. Yeah. Because the Arabs were not seen as a formidable force.
Yeah, exactly.
But one man came with one message, unified the entire peninsula, and within 20 years?
And I think that's the beauty of Islam. Honestly, that's the beauty of Islam. And the fact that we are Muslim today is testament to what the Sahaba did during the time of Abu Bakr, during the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, right? Because, the fact that, for example, like myself, we're both from like Bangladesh, for example, right? How did Islam enter Bangladesh? How did Islam enter India, right? It's because of the work, the foundations that the Khulafa al-Rashidun put in.
They
We are calling ourselves Muslims only by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and of course the work of people like Umar al-Khattab, and of course him as a leader, subhanallah. Again, so many different stories, so many different characteristics we can talk about. The fact that even though he was a very harsh, very strong man, right? When it came to
he was a no nonsense man.
He was a no nonsense man, right? And even though he went to as far as saying that even his own children, he would be even more harsh on them because he has high expectations, right? No claims of nepotism like we have today. This idea of if you're rich enough, you can become an MP or prime minister or whatever it is, right?
You can buy your way.
You can buy your way through, right?
Yeah.
And he was like, no, even my children have to ensure that I am even more harsh on them. They do anything even slightly wrong, I will punish them double. Right, this is the mentality of Umar radiallahu anhu, to a point where he wouldn't even have any bodyguards because he had his full trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right, and again, numerous stories like how he treated when the story of when he met that mother with the 2 young children.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
She didn't know that he was the Khalif. She was starving. She was like, why are your children crying? And she's like, I'm stirring the water, so hopefully I can trick them into falling asleep. Because we don't have any food for him. And Umar was like, subhanallah, if I can't even look after my people, what am I going to say to Allah in the Day of Judgment? If one sheep, one dog is hungry in my ummah, right? These are the leaders that we used to have, right? And these are the leaders that we need to have today, right? One dog, any animal that is hunger in my lands, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask me about this.
He'll question
you about this. And he understood this. And he determined to make sure that he could do everything that he could. And these are the lessons, these are the people we should be learning from. Right? We can talk about, let's be honest, like we could talk about Muhammad al-Fatih, we could talk about Salahudin. They're great characters, subhanAllah, we can learn so much from them. But really, you learn the lives of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, you learn the lives of Umar al-Khattab, and most of all, even, of course, after the Prophet sallallahu after the seerah.
Of course.
Right? SubhanAllah, I honestly believe that you learn about the core Sahaba, you know what you need to do. You know what is required from you in life. As a leader, from a leader of just being leader of your family, to all the way to a leader of a country. Study the lives of the Sahaba. Study the lives of the Khulafa al-Rashidun. Even people like Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, right? And know that, look, these are people that Allah has blessed, right? And these are people that we should try and emulate. So Umar al-Khattab, again, I could go on numerous stories about him. And again, expansion-wise, how he dealt with Khalid bin Walid, right? Khalid bin Walid was winning battle after battle after battle. But why is it that he
eventually demoted
Khalid bin Walid? Was it because he was upset with him? As accusations are made about Umar al-Khattab, he was jealous of his cousin. Well, of course not. No, that's not why he did that. Because he understood that he understood how people work.
Yeah.
That if people are going to start believing it was Khalid bin Walid winning the battle, it's not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? He knew that. He knew the mentality of people. This is another characteristic a leader must have. You must know how human beings work. You must know how people work. Especially if you're a leader of a large group. You need to know how crowd mentality works as well. And that can also have a very, very big impact on how countries run, how discipline is created. And again, Umar ibn Khattab understood all of that. Right? And subhanAllah, I wish we had the time to talk about it a lot more.
Maybe in the future,
inshallah. Yeah, but Umar Khattab, there's obviously a lot more people more knowledgeable than I am when it comes to his life story. But these are just some basics. We're not asking to be experts, but you listen to those who know, isn't it?
Definitely. So, you've mentioned 3 things that are required for the success of a nation: community, family, and institution.
Yeah.
Would you say that these 3 must work hand in hand, or a leader can have one and not the other?
No, they must be in hand. You can have a very strong family, right? You can have a very, very strong family that nurture you properly, that teaches you the skills required to be a good leader, right? Or a good follower, in fact, right?
Yeah.
Because not everyone is built to be leaders. Let's be straight up with that, right? Some people are built to be very strong followers, right? But even if you have your family, for example, if the community do not accept you, then what can you do with that? What can you do with your skills, right? Like, subhanAllah, I see, in my experience with working with young kids, right? I see so many students with really a lot of potential. I know their parents, I know their families, subhanAllah, they're brought up, subhanAllah, in a really, really good way. But they don't have the platform, right? Because the community values qualifications more than character, unfortunately, as is what we live in today, right?
Yeah.
And they're not given the platform to speak about what they need to speak about or do what they need to do to help the Muslim Ummah, to help the Muslim community.
Yeah.
So they all come in hand. And of course, institutions also need to be part of that community as well. You can have the community,
of course,
community support, but if we don't know how to organize, then are we really going to be able to provide those platforms for those sort of people, right? Salahudin, we often hear, where is our next Salahudin? Where is our Muhammad al-Fatih?
Yeah.
Right? We often forget, why can't it be you and me? Why can't that be you and me?
Exactly.
Why can't it be the people in this room? Right? Why do we ask the question, do we all need to seek to be Salahuddins of Muhammad al-Fatih? Why can't we be the Akhshamsuddins, the scholars that benefit Muhammad al-Fatih? Why can't we be, for example, Nuruddin, right? The mentor and master of Salahuddin. Yeah. Why can't we be people like them? Right? So everyone has different skill sets. It's about that. It's about understanding what your skill set is and making sure that you're prospering with that. And you can't do that unless you have those three components. They come in hand, 100%.
Nice, mashallah. That's pretty uplifting, and it's good. And inshallah, later on down the line, we'll have more discussions on like Muslim leaders and maybe hopefully go through their lives. Now, one of the goals of Tarikhology is to provide histories like for the general audience as easy and as factual as possible, because there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of like fake news, if I'm going to use the term, online, and especially as we all know, like when news comes to you, the first thing is that, as the Quran states, when news comes to you, you should verify it.
Yes.
Unfortunately, and I've seen this, I'm sure you've seen this as well, where we just get like messages of like posters being sent of like some might be true, some you could probably tell they're definitely not real. But it's more of it's like an emotional response. Like that's what people are trying to get, and this is what we were discussing earlier. But making an emotional response with lies does not benefit any side. So one thing that I wanted to speak about was the history of Palestine. Now, could you speak briefly about the origin? Where does the term Palestine come from? Who were they?
Well, the term Palestine in itself, obviously, some people attribute it all the way to Egyptian times, ancient Egypt, where we have like the Philistine tribes and so on and so forth. Right. So the word Palestine, again, in the modern day discourse, we consider it Palestine based on the idea of nation states, the concept of nation states that was created after World War I. But when we're talking about the people of Palestine, of course, there's a very, very long and very rich history when it comes to the land of Palestine itself, the area in which we call Palestine today, right? Because subhanAllah, we know obviously it is the home place of Jerusalem, for example, the Masjid al-Aqsa, where many of our prophets, many of our Anbiya have lived in, have preached the message in, right? So in and of itself, the term Filisteen in of itself, the term Palestine itself is attributed to, for example, the Philistine tribes. But again, probably originated back in Egyptian times, back when ancient Egypt had control over Jerusalem. Okay.
Could you speak about the people of like Canaan, the prophets, the Judaic kingdoms at the time?
Yeah. I mean, to summarize, the history, I mean, the first recorded people were the people of Canaan, right? And in fact, the word Palestine comes from the times of the tribes of Canaan, right? They were the first recorded people that we have, first inscriptions that we have. We still have artifacts from that time that have inscriptions of the word Canaan on them, which makes us believe that, okay, they were the first recorded inhabitants anyway. There were probably people before that, but we don't have records of them. We don't have records of them, unfortunately. And then for a long period of time, the Canaan tribes had control over Palestine. And then we had a variety of different groups of people taking over. So we did have the Judean kingdoms come. So we have, for example, Ibrahim alayhi salam moving to what is now Palestine. Ibrahim alayhi salam, and he had two sons, Ismail and Ishaq alayhi salam. Right, and of course we know from Ismail's lineage we have the Arabs and we have the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then from Ishaq alayhi salam's lineage we have prophets like Yaqub, Musa alayhi salam, and so on and so forth, Isa alayhi salam as well. And it's from Yaqub alayhi salam. Of course, as we know, Yaqub, another name for him was Israel, right? From his 12 sons, come 12 tribes. The 12 tribes, the Bani Israel, right? And obviously the Bani Israel would obviously then split within these 12 tribes, and then essentially what is now the area of Palestine itself, obviously the 12 tribes will also go elsewhere, but that land we now know as Palestine was essentially created as a Judean kingdom, right? So again, this is where the claim comes from, where the Zionists, for example, say that the Jewish people have a claim to the Holy Land. Right, so it comes from around between the years, I can't remember the exact dates, but between the years about 500 BCE to about 1000 BCE. Between those years, essentially what happened to those Judean kingdoms, that they were ended up splitting up into the north and the south Sumerian kingdoms. The north, and because of the split, the Syrian Empire in the east, right, in places like Iraq and Iran nowadays, they used it to their advantage and decided to conquer the north. However, the south was able to stay in power for much longer until a very famous ancient figure. Who's the most famous ancient figure you can remember? Comes about.
What is he? He's a military leader.
Military leader, yeah. Famous, very, very famous. Got a nickname.
Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great comes about. And he's able, Alexander the Great, yeah, that's his nickname. He comes about and then he's able to conquer the
He conquers most of the known world.
Yeah, he conquers most of the known world. He conquers what is now the area of Palestine, which obviously used to be under the control of the Judean tribes. The Judean kingdoms, right? And obviously, I've skipped a lot of details, the time of, for example, Dawood alayhi salam, he ruled over, Jerusalem was his base, right? Jerusalem was his base. And of course, Sulaiman alayhi salam, who ruled an empire the world had never ever seen before. So, an empire that the world will never ever see again, right? Because he ruled over the jinn and the animal kind.
Yeah, and the animals.
Yeah, subhanAllah, the stories of the prophets are beautiful. But moving forward, after we have the Alexander the Great, the split in his empire after he dies, and again we have a variety of different groups until the Romans come about. The Romans then are able to take over Jerusalem. Now, what a lot of people don't know is the Persians actually do fight the Romans for what is Palestine. Yeah, not because of for religious reasons, right? But simply because Palestine is a very good strategic route, trade route, right? Right, it's quite close to the Mediterranean Sea. It's got access to a lot of trade routes, right? So the Persians were like, we want this, right? So the Romans and the Persians fight it out for a bit. The Persians have control over it at one point.
What year are we talking?
We're talking about now, like 500 BCE.
Okay.
We're now talking about like bang on a zero.
Bang. Okay.
Yeah. So we're talking about that period of about 500 years. A lot of things happen, but I'm skipping over a lot of details.
Of course.
But then eventually, by probably about like 100 BCE, right, the Romans pretty much have full control over. The empire has been split into West and East. The Western Empire had fallen. The Western Empire was starting to gain in strength. And the Eastern Empire was also gaining in strength. But just because it was becoming too big, they ended up splitting up. So that is during Christian rule, where now we have, for example, the Jewish people being expelled from what we now know as Palestine. And again, a lot of people reference this story, right? Because the Romans, when they came into power, when the Christians came into power, they basically expelled anyone that wasn't following their sort of creed from Palestine.
Wasn't the temple, the King Herod's temple, destroyed in?
Yes.
I can't remember exactly which year now. I think 67 AD.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that, but the temple was destroyed.
Yeah.
They were expelled.
Yeah. So essentially, the main thing that happens in 70 AD, where the Jewish people are expelled from the land because of the revolts that take place. The Jewish people revolt against they fight back, right? And they revolt against the Romans, and the Romans obviously are able to crush the rebellion, essentially expel them from their land. And again, that is essentially, what a lot of people again claim today is the start of diaspora, of the Jewish people that start scattering all around the world. From the land of their land all the way across the world. Yeah. So it's until obviously, so the Romans have control over it, and then between obviously 70 AD to all the way to 600s when the Muslims take it over, there are a lot of things that happen within the Roman Empire. We have the rise of Constantine, right? He converts to Christianity. He makes the idea of the Trinity very popular through the Council of Nicaea, right? He rejects he creates a council in which we want to unite all the Christian creeds, right? So he makes like the Nicene Creed, which promotes Trinitarianism instead of Unitarianism, right? So Constantine becomes the leader of the Constantinople, of the empire, moves his capital to Byzantium, which is now Constantinople. And of course, the Byzantine Empire is very, very powerful at this point in time. And eventually we go to the 600s. It's about 300 years after Constantine. We have Heraclius, right? The very emperor that Prophet ﷺ sent a letter to accept Islam, and was the emperor during the time of the Battle of Yarmouk. So alhamdulillah, the Muslims are able to rise in Umar radiallahu anhu's time. He's able to take over Jerusalem, right? Abu Bakr ibn al-Jarrah, Khalid ibn Walid were all there. Amr ibn al-As, they were all there because they had been fighting the battles in the neighboring regions. And of course, that's the start of Muslim rule. So that's from like the ancient, that's a very basic timeline of from the tribes of Canaan all the way to Muslim rule in about the 1600s. So we have, like, you know, if we're going to play a numbers game, let's play a numbers game for a second, right?
Of course.
Because a lot of people claim that, okay, yes, the Jewish people, their land is in Jerusalem, right? The land is of Palestine. But if we're going to take that argument and play a numbers game with that, the Judean kingdoms were probably only in power over that land, what is now Palestine, for probably about 250 to 300 years, right? Now let's compare to the Christians. Christians had control over Palestine. If you include the Crusades, in fact, the time of the Crusades, probably about 300 to 400 years. The Muslims, however, when they conquered it in 634 AD, I believe it was, right, all the way to 1917 when General Allenby takes over Palestine.
Over 1,000 years.
We're talking about nearly about 800 to 1,000 years. So if we're going to play a numbers game, who has more claim to the land of Palestine? Do we see what we're saying? All right. But again, from the time that Umar radiallahu anhu takes it over to the time of the Ottoman Empire, obviously it goes through loads of different, you know, problems, and, you know, at times obviously the Crusaders took over, as we've mentioned.
Yeah, the Crusader kingdoms.
The Crusader kingdoms take over. The Muslims no longer have control over it. But eventually the Ottomans come to, Salahudin comes, liberates it again. Period of time again, turmoil. Palestine, subhanAllah, you know, if you ask the mountains of Palestine, you know, what have they seen? What have they seen? SubhanAllah. You know, it's it's a very, very rich history there.
There's a movie called Kingdom of Heaven. Have you watched it?
I've watched it.
What do you make of it?
It's quite a silly story, I'll be honest.
It's when I first watched it, I was very wow.
I mean, the fact that they portray Salahudin in the way that they do in that movie is quite surprising. You know, the way this, but again, it's just the whole story in of itself, which is complete. The characters in itself, like, you know, the characters that are in the story, and stuff, they're all real characters.
But yeah, when I first saw it, I was like, wow. But then obviously when you actually read like historical journals and documents, they were like, none of this is
true. Like, I mean, there was quite a funny scene in it where, like, you know, Balian of Ibelin, the main character, I can't remember the actor's name, I can't remember his name, but
he's not important.
Yeah. But like, he's teaching the people how to like dig pits and create wells and stuff like that. I'm like, they knew this like 1,000 years before.
I mean, they are the civilization, right? They would definitely know that. I think that's the scene where they discovered there's water.
There's water, that scene, yeah.
I was just like, wait, there was no water in Jerusalem.
Yeah, so it's quite. I mean, it's made on the basis of entertainment and Hollywood and stuff like that, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
true. And again, they can't portray, you know, the Muslims as too good of a people, can they? Right?
I mean, the way that they portrayed Salahudin surprisingly was.
No, but even then, because it's only because, you know, even Western historians, I'm talking about famous Western historians who are famously Orientalists, by the way, that have said things about like hadith that, you know, are just completely like, you know, completely false, right? Like Stanley Lane Poole, for example, very, very famous English historian, one of the most foremost, like, you know, when it comes to like Western historiography, he's up there, right? When it comes to that scholarship, right? Even he says that, you know, if Salahudin was only known for the Battle of Hittin, right? Only known for the Battle of the liberation of Jerusalem. If he was only known for that, then people will still remember to him to this day as being a charismatic, kind, generous leader.
I mean, look, that was nearly 1,000 years ago. Yeah. I was talking about it on this podcast right now.
Exactly, right? So Salahudin is, again, why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed this ummah to remember him when we forget about all the other leaders that were there at the time? Right, we don't remember the names of the Fatimid Khalifa and the Abbasid Khalifa and the Umayyad Khalifa at the time, or the leader of the petty kingdoms. Right, we don't remember them, but we remember Salahudin, and that's for a reason. Wow, that was pretty interesting. You spoke about Christian rule over Palestine. Yeah. Then eventually you have the during the thing, the Khulafa and Umar conquers Jerusalem. So briefly, do you want to touch upon the Muslim rule of Palestine? So when Umar radiallahu anhu, you know, he's called upon by the patriarch Sophronius himself that Umar al-Khattab has to come from Medina to Jerusalem himself to take the gates of the city. And it's in this tour of the city. So Sophronius gives him a tour of the city, which, you know, is a very, very, you know, it's a beautiful story that is mentioned in the hadith books and the history books. There's two main stories I want to mention from that. Of course. From that particular event. One particular event is when Sophronius, when Umar al-Khattab is saying that, okay, I need a place to pray now. We need to do our prayers. And Sophronius tells him, no, pray here. Right?
It's fine, just pray here.
Pray in what was the vicinity of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, for anyone that doesn't know, is basically where Christians believe was the death place of Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, right? So it's a very, very holy place for Christians. They come for pilgrimage even to this day.
Yeah.
So he's like, pray here, you know.
Just pray here.
Yeah, just pray here. But Umar Khattab had foresight. Again, another characteristic. Very efficient. He knew what people were like. He knew that if I prayed here, if I prayed at this spot, what would the Muslims come and do later on?
They'll come.
They'll break it down and say, no, this is ours because our Khalif prayed. He understood this. So what he decided to do, no, let me go somewhere else, a place where it's not vacated by any religious, buildings,
symbolism, yeah.
right? And again, what ended up happening, that very place he ended up praying
became a mosque.
Became a masjid, right? So he knew, again, he had that foresight. And the second part is when he came to the part which obviously used to be part of like the kingdom of Solomon, the temple of Solomon. He saw it was broken apart. At this point in time, the Christians were using it as a dump site. They were using it as a garbage site. This was a holy place for Jewish people, right? They were using it as a garbage site. And what he did, right, was he himself, he didn't get his people to do it, right? He himself started picking up the rubbish, picking up the stones, and started tidying up the area. And obviously when everyone started seeing him do this, everyone started doing it as well. SubhanAllah, so the conquest of the opening, I should say, of Jerusalem, right, the liberation of Jerusalem was done in such a way that no historical commentator can say that this was not peaceful, right? The pact of Umar in of itself is exemplary of what Islam asks us to do when we take over lands.
Are there any like specific books that you'd recommend anyone that's interested on this topic?
Well, Dr. Salabi, his books are excellent, right? He writes autobiography. He wrote an autobiography on Umar al-Khattab himself.
Well, what's the name of the book?
Umar al-Khattab, volume 1, volume 2. Very, very famous books. Like any books written by Dr. Salabi, Dr. Ali Salabi, I would definitely recommend. SubhanAllah, his books have excellent. He even writes a 3-volume book on Salahudin Ayyubi as well.
Okay.
And Muhammad al-Fatih as well. I believe that's only a 1-volume thing.
Okay.
So I would definitely recommend those ones.
So we spoke about like the early Judaic kingdoms, and we spoke about Christian role, the Muslim role, and obviously now we've got actually touching on the Christian role, we have the Crusade period that we were discussing earlier. Based off of your study of the Crusades, how would you say its comparison compared to modern day conflicts? Yeah,
this is why I say, especially what's happening in Palestine right now, right? I say it's vital for every single person to know their history. Because if we actually understand the history of the Crusades, there are so many comparisons to what is happening in the modern day, right? I'll give you an example. In 1095, right? In 1095, when the Muslims are disunited, exactly as the Muslims are disunited today, right? We have our nation states, we have countries like Syria, Egypt, all caring about themselves. Let's be honest here, right? Exact same situation was happening during Crusader times. The Abbasid Empire has fragmented, right? We have different sects, we have different groups, we have different kingdoms that are in place, all full of people that only care about their own kingdoms and not the cause of the Ummah. Right? There is no unity whatsoever. After the death of Nizam al-Mulk and Malik Shah of the Seljuk Empire, he was the last unifying presence in the Muslim world. After they passed away, it was just all division, right? And this is what allowed the Crusaders to come in, right? When you actually look at the story in of itself, how the Crusaders were able to enter Jerusalem, is because the defenders of the city, because they were having a dispute with the Fatimids at the time, they were having a dispute with other groups of people at the time. They cared more about solving those disputes than the 60,000 strong army that was trying to attempt and take over Jerusalem, right? In 1095, I'll give you an example, right, of how similar it is today to today. Yeah. Pope Clement, right? He's Pope Urban II, sorry. Apologize.
The one that
called the Crusades. He goes, he gives a speech at Clermont in France, right? And he's given a speech not to just cardinals and people of the church. He's given a speech to ordinary people. And there are 5 accounts of this speech that still exist today, right? I'm just going to give you some language from the lightest one, the one that is the least critical, right? The least critical. And in this speech, he talks about how he doesn't describe the Muslims as Muslims or even as people. He describes them as Muhammadans that are savages, that are barbarians, that are pagans, that deserve to be killed, right? Right. This is the language that is used. You can see it. You can see it in the sources. The sources still exist today, You can see the sort of language that he uses. Now think about, is this the process of dehumanization, which I would definitely recommend you listen to Dr. Uthman Latif about. He writes a book about this. He talks a lot about this concept of dehumanization. What makes a group of people decide, you know what, a group of people decide deserve to be killed, right? Is when you debate, when you know, get rid of their status to a point where they're animals rather than humans. And this is what Pope Clement did. And he promised penance, he promised forgiveness, right? And again, do we not see this to those who went to fight, ordinary people, right? No matter how much of a criminal you are, you go and fight in Jerusalem, that's it, you're forgiven, right? This is what he said, right? Now we see this sort of rhetoric and this sort of language even today to describe the Palestinians. When we hear certain officials, right, referring to our Palestinian brothers and sisters as animals that deserve to be killed, right? You know, that intent that, you know, will create an image of people that, you know, that deserve to be killed. That is why, you know, we have incessant killing, unfortunately, taking place in Palestine today. And again, it's that sort of comparisons that we can make, right? When it comes to allowing the Crusaders to come into Jerusalem. So those are the sort of, you know, comparisons that we can make today. There are a lot more comparisons, but, you know, like for example, how Nuruddin, for example, was able to rise in power, right? What is it that allowed them to rise in power, right? What happened immediately after 1099, right? These are questions we've got to ask. For example, if we want to know how Palestine will be liberated today, let's look at the past. Let's look at how it was liberated in the past. How did Salahudin come out of nowhere? Did Nuruddin come out of nowhere? Why did it take 87 years to liberate Jerusalem? Because a number of things took place. From 1099, the year that the Crusaders were able to take Jerusalem, to 1187, when he was able to win the Battle of Hattin. There were a number of things that took place. Just a few of those things. And again, please stop me if, you know.
No, perfectly fine. We've got maybe 5-6 minutes left.
6 minutes. Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. So like, I'll talk quickly, very briefly,
of course,
on the comparisons of what we can do today and what the Muslims did at the time of the Crusades. Immediately after the attack took place, you know, when you look at the sources, you know, subhanAllah, you know, imagine what these Muslims went through. These are Crusader sources, right? Crusader sources. It's not Muslim sources saying this, so you can't blame people for saying exaggeration, right? They would, the Crusaders, you know, in one source, I believe it's Folker of Chartist, right, where he says like, what a wonderful sight it was. What was this wonderful sight? What was this wonderful sight? Ankles, you know, blood filling up all the way up to your ankles, right? The vision of seeing, you know, hundreds of dead bodies, right, of ulama, of, you know, of learned ascetic people, right, ascetic people, religious people, all across Jerusalem, with the Crusaders shouting "Dus Volt, Dus Volt," which means God wills it. God wills it. What were they invoking? Why were they invoking these terms? As the Crusaders were entering into Jerusalem, they were saying God wills it. Dus Volt, Dus Volt. They were invoking something called the Joshuan spirit. In the book of Joshua, in Deuteronomy, the book of Deuteronomy, talks about the rules of war. It talks about how pagans need to be killed. How, you know, in times of conquest, that they, you know, no one should survive. Right? No one should survive. And again, if you look at the rhetoric that is made about the Palestinians today, who do they invoke?
One of the ministers I saw, he mentioned, or he compared them to the Amalekites.
Amalekites, exactly. And again, this is the people that, you know, that were referred to in the book of Deuteronomy, in the, you know, the book of Joshua. Right? Again, the same rhetoric that is being used in the Crusades is the same rhetoric that is being used today. Right? And again, why are they doing that? Simply because it's the process of dehumanization. Again, Dr. Uthman Latif talks about this in a lot more detail. Definitely recommend you get his book on this particular topic, of how dehumanization can cause an ordinary person. Remember, for an ordinary person like you and me, what would have to go in our minds to believe that someone else deserves to be killed, deserves to die, right? Is when you reduce them to the status of an animal. For me, if you told me our chicken got killed, I mean, I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm hungry, isn't it? Right? But a human being, if you reduce them to that sort of state, look what might happen, right? Look what might happen. Now let's look at the Muslim response very quickly. Immediately we have our shuyukh. Immediately it's always the scholars that are the first people to come out and say something about this, right? Whilst the leaders were still scrambling on, oh, you know, look what's happened, but they were still more focused on their own pieces of land. We have people like Ali ibn Tahir al-Sulami, right? He writes the Kitab al-Jihad, first time where, you know, actually, you know, trying to reinvigorate the spirit of jihad amongst the people, right? amongst the people. And it takes him a very, very long time. Even Imam Ghazali at this point in time, the famous Imam Ghazali of Ihya Ulumuddin, he writes about, what the Franks have done, right? He writes about what these crusaders have done. And again, slowly and surely, it's this sort of climate that, the scholars that are creating, right? The scholar, of institutions that are created and stuff like that, that then allows people like Nuruddin to come in. And I want to tell one more thing about, again, this is because I don't want to say things that maybe we can't do. For example, like raising an army. Is that something we as ordinary people can do? No, we can't, right? But that is what Salahudin did. That is what Nuruddin was able to do because they were in those positions of spheres of influence. But what did Nuruddin do to the ordinary people? What sort of ordinary people joined his army, right? This is what Nuruddin did, right? When Nuruddin Zengi, by the way, who was, the master and mentor of Salahuddin, who first really reinvigorates that spirit of jihad to liberate Jerusalem, he had a three-part plan. First was unite the Muslim Ummah, unite the states of Mosul, Damascus, Aleppo, right? Because those are the three most powerful states and they surrounded the Crusader kingdoms, right? Each one of them had leaders in them that only cared about themselves. And Nuruddin knew if he was able to unite these three places easily he can take Jerusalem back. Second step, take back Egypt from the Fatimids, right? Egypt, again, another country surrounding Jerusalem. Again, if I take control over Egypt, I can take control of all the resources and take, hopefully retake Jerusalem. And the third was obviously liberate Jerusalem, right? That's what it was three-part plan. You know what he did before any of that? What did he do? He made it compulsory for every single madrasa in his domains, in his lands, in Damascus, right? In Aleppo, to teach the virtues of Masjid al-Aqsa. Because why is it that, for example, if you were living in Iraq at the time, why should you join the fight to go liberate Jerusalem, a country that is hundreds of miles away and I'll never see, right? What has that got to do with me, right? But what Nuruddin was able to do, he was able to instill a love for Jerusalem, a love for Islam, a love for Masjid al-Aqsa, which is why the army that would essentially, the army that he would take to try and conquer Egypt, the very exact same army that Salahuddin would take to liberate Jerusalem, were people of substance. They knew the virtues of Masjid al-Aqsa. They knew the importance of Masjid al-Aqsa. And that is when the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came, and that is when Jerusalem was liberated. Right? The institution of the madrasas, they taught the virtues of Masjid al-Aqsa, they taught the history of Palestine. And this is why it's so important, the bare minimum that we can do as Muslims today, absolute bare minimum, is know the history, know the politics, know the ins and outs and the virtues of Masjid al-Aqsa, Jerusalem, and the land, what is Palestine today. That is what he did. And one final point, and then I'll end here, right? Did you know that Nuruddin and Salahuddin, they spent more time fighting their fellow Muslims than they did the Crusaders?
I did not know that.
Did you know that?
No, I did not.
Salahuddin spent 10 years before he could do anything with the Crusaders. 10 years just trying to unite the Muslim lands. 10 years. Right? He spent more time dealing with his fellow Muslims than the Crusaders.
He understood that, this is a point you mentioned earlier, community.
Yeah.
He understood that without a proper community, you're not going to be successful in, I don't know, for example, further conquest.
Yeah. And unification.
Unification.
Yeah. Muslims, we are nothing if we're not united. Right? In every single part of history, right? We have only ever been successful. These so-called golden ages that we have, right? We are united. We are successful because we are united. And that's what a successful leader must understand. We remember the leaders of the times where we were being united, right? What happened to Muslim Spain? Why did it fall? Why did the Reconquista happen? Because we became disunited. Again, why did the Abbasids fall? We became disunited. So again, it's what we need to remember in the modern day. What we need to first understand is that, think about that three-part plan that Nuruddin had, right? You want to, do well to the people of Palestine. You want to liberate the lands for the sake of Allah and to institute the Sharia in that land. One, you must be united. And second, educate yourself. That is so important. We have limited sphere of influence here in the UK as ordinary people like you and me. But what we can do and what everyone can do is learn. And okay, let's say you can't read, right? Say, for those who can read, you must read. For those who can write, you must write. For those who can speak, must speak. If you can't do any of that, then do the very basic. Listen to those who speak. Listen to those who read and write. And give them the platforms that they need in order to spread that message. And that is what we need to do as Muslims in the UK.
You used the term jihad, and that's now it's become a politically loaded term. So just to clarify, what did you...
Of course, jihad, so when we're talking about jihad in the context of the Crusades, right? We're talking about, struggling, not only in the sense, obviously you have the inner struggle, you have the outer struggle, right? when we're talking about in the context of the Crusades, we're talking about reinvigorating the state of we are going to fight back. We are going to resist.
So it was you could say, if we use modern terms for someone that doesn't necessarily understand the phrase, it was more of a what's the word? It's like it was basically, how would you explain it? It's like well, how would we?
So I would explain, if you want to try and convert into modern terms, it's very difficult. Obviously, when it comes to Arabic terms, when it comes to Islamic terms, English is obviously a modern language that doesn't have really a lot of connotations with Islamic notions and stuff like that. But jihad is very, very simply, one jihad can only be instituted by the Caliph's orders, right? Can only be given by a Caliph's orders.
Yeah, there are certain conditions
in order for jihad
a lot
to
of
take
people
place.
seem to ignore nowadays.
Yeah, there are conditions to jihad, right? Now, jihad is obviously, I don't want to go into the rulings and stuff like that, but a very basic definition is fighting for the sake of Allah. Fighting for the sake of Allah, fighting for, Allah's deen, right? And in the context of Crusades, that is what the scholars try to do. That is what Sulaimi tried to do. This is what Imam Ghazali tried to do. Right?
On a slightly wider scale, a lot of people, especially when jihad is used now, a lot of people ignore the fact that jihad isn't necessarily physical fighting.
Of course, no, yeah.
I'm just saying this because a lot of our viewers might wonder what jihad is. But you have jihad nafs, you're fighting yourself.
Yeah,
that's not a literal fight.
Yeah.
For example, you're waking up for Fajr. That's jihad nafs, because you don't want to wake up so early. You're fighting yourself to get up to pray or to give charity. It's an internal struggle.
That's it. Yeah.
Obviously, it's become like a more political term, but when we use the term jihad, we're referring to the struggle.
It depends on context.
Yeah, of course. Context.
In the context of the Crusades, of course, we have to talk about the fighting.
Of course.
100%.
Of course.
But of course, when we talk about individuals, of course, the jihad is us waking up for Fajr.
Waking up for Fajr. It's the internal struggle.
Internal struggle, of course.
As the definition goes. The final point, and we'll end on this, was you wanted to speak about post World War I, so the founding of Zionism, and like a general brief history of the 20th century, and then we can end on this.
Yeah, of course. The World War I was a game changer for not only Palestine but the entire world.
Yeah.
Right. There are numerous agreements that take place within World War I. For example, we have the Hussein-McMahon correspondence, where the land of Palestine is now promised to Sharif Hussein, who's been promised an Arab caliphate in response. In retaliation, he revolts against the Ottoman Empire. Right. At the same time, we have the Sykes-Picot Agreement, the British promising it to themselves, and we have the Balfour Declaration of 1917, the British Arthur Balfour, Foreign Secretary, promising that he will do everything that he can to establish Jewish state in Palestine. Right. And of course, numerous things take place. Allenby takes over, the British take over Palestine. The mandate is established after World War I. Eventually, after World War II, when Britain can no longer establish, maintain its empire, essentially hands over Palestine first to the United Nations. Right. The United Nations were they go to the United Nations can you solve this mess for us? Right. They offer a very, half-hearted plan, which the Arabs completely disregard because it was a ridiculous one. But then essentially the Israelis are okay, no, we're going to, fine, if you're not going to accept this plan, we're going to take what we want to take. Right. So in 1948, the state is established. Yeah. And of course, ever since then, and it wasn't since 1948. The Arabs were revolting even back before in 1936, right, against the British, right? So even to this day, right, there has been more and more encroachment into Palestinian land through numerous events that take place, settler colonies, and again, international law. Despite international law literally writing the book on everything that Israel have done illegally according to international law, it is all disregarded because the United Nations in and of itself is a flawed organization, right? I teach politics. I can definitely argue the United Nations is 100% a flawed organization that is very limited in what it can do.
If you had to give your biggest reason as to why, what would you say?
I mean, the most fundamental reason is the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council is based on five powers: USA, China, Russia, France, and UK. Now, when it comes to any sort of resolutions that come to the UN Security Council, which is the most powerful organ within the UN body, right? If any one of them says no to a resolution, that's it. The whole resolution is wiped out, right? And in any resolution that has ever criticized Israel, what have the US gone and done? They vetoed it. They vetoed it. And it's because primarily of this veto power that, no resolutions can be passed, especially when it comes to the recent ceasefires calls for ceasefire that have been made, right? The UN have all made, the USA have all vetoed any sort of resolutions that is calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. So again, the UN itself is not a place that we can go to for solutions. And even then they would provide a two-state solution, which in and of itself is a flawed one as well, right? It all goes back to 1948, the original partition plan. Then, if the two-state solution was a solution, why wasn't it accepted back in 1948? This is a question you've got to ask.
And then obviously you have the 1967
war. You have 1973 Yom Kippur. You have the Intifadas. You have the Oslo Accords as well. The establishment of the creation of Oslo.
Oslo Accords.
The PLO. Yasser Arafat. Again, if we had the time, obviously we could talk about that in a lot more detail. But again, alhamdulillah, there's been a lot of resources now, right? In the last month or so, subhanAllah, there's a multitude of resources that I've seen come out from people, right? Even online personalities, books that have been created. And I saw one post where a brother, very, very kindly put 1,000 books on the Palestine and Israel conflict on just one drive, right? Loads of resources for us to access. We now have the information readily available to us, right? So it's a matter of understanding, okay, how do I filter through them? So how do I understand, okay, what is right and what's wrong? How do I understand what is the Islamic viewpoint on this? Right, and the way to do that is go to the people that know. Go to the people that know. I guess, and then they can direct you to those relevant resources.
I guess, and this could be the last point. I guess the take back from this podcast would be to, and this would be, I'd say this to our viewers, is to educate yourself.
That's it. Yeah.
As hard as it is, don't believe everything you see on social media. Like the posts that are sent with no source, with no reference.
That's it. Yeah.
There are plenty of journals, articles, books on the ongoing crisis. Educate yourself. I mean, that's essentially the best thing that we could possibly do.
Yeah.
Would you have any final advice as we...
No, I mean, very, very simple. Go to people who know, right? In the same way, if you can't read and write, no problem. Go to the people that can, right? Go to trusted people that can, right? And I would always advise, especially when it comes to Palestine, when it comes to anything that is remotely, anything to do with Muslim lands, go to Muslims. Go to Muslims, right? Yes, alhamdulillah, non-Muslims do give us valuable insights, right? But at the end of the day, who has the solution? It's Islam that has the solution. No one else, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us His Quran, right? Has given us His spoken word for a reason, right? Because Islam is not something that is just written. It must be taught to people. It must be presented in action by people, right? Islam is the only has the only solution. And we must remember, yes, we can take others as allies, right? We can take others as allies. We can take non-Muslims as allies. But we must remember that the solution to the problem only lies within Islam, not within a two-state solution, not within the United Nations, not with anything remotely man-made, but it is within the jurisdiction of what Islam has legislated to us, and Islam has a solution, nothing else.
Well, that was nicely put. I'd like to thank you for coming on. Today's segment was slightly longer. Inshallah, in the future we'll have a bigger discussion
Inshallah
on the Crusades, because the Crusades are a very fascinating topic.
Yes, definitely.
And I'd like to thank all of our viewers for watching, and I would like to thank everyone for their ongoing support. I'd like to ask everyone to like, share, and subscribe. And with that, I'd like to conclude by saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.